The cooling fan inside my laptop whirred a thin mechanical hum, and it was the only sound left in the apartment. When Justin packed his bags, he took the television, the black soundbar, the gaming console, and the oversized leather recliner he sat in every night. What remained was the pale gray sofa I bought 2 years ago, the small wooden dining table with its 2 matching chairs, and this heavy silence. The blue light from the spreadsheet reflected against the lenses of my wire-rimmed glasses. Beside my left knee, a glass of water sat on the floor. A bead of condensation gathered near the rim, slid down the smooth glass, and dropped onto the cold wood. My bare feet rested against the chilled floorboards. I had forgotten my slippers hours ago. On the screen in front of me sat 24 months of data. Column A held the date, column B the transaction description, column C the dollar amount, and column D my own category code, R for restaurant, G for gas, A for apartment rent, C for cash withdrawal. Column E glowed with highlight colors where yellow meant confirmed, green meant probable, and white meant unclear. I scrolled to the bottom row, and the total read, $47,312 in dissipation. I read the number out loud to the empty room, and it did not change. This was the real number. This was the amount of money Justin had spent on his parallel life, while I paid $1,650 in rent every month, while I paid $340 for our joint car insurance, while I paid $89 for internet and $67 for electricity. I looked at the total, and my chest was hollow. For 4 years, I had managed our finances. Every time my stomach tightened over a discrepancy, I had pushed it down. Now the numbers proved me right. $47,000 worth of being right. I closed the laptop lid, and the room went black. I opened it again, and the blue light washed over my hands. I closed it, opened it a third time, and my breathing hitched. I was sitting in my kitchen doing the exact same thing my mother had done 14 years ago. She had found the hotel receipt in my father's coat pocket. She had looked at it, folded it, and burned it on the gas stove. I was looking at my own version of that receipt, but I was not going to burn it. 4 weeks ago, Justin sat exactly where his recliner used to be and told me he had been sleeping with another woman for 2 years. That Thursday evening had started like any other. I walked through the front door after 10 hours at the accounting firm. The apartment was quiet. Justin was not home yet. He had texted earlier to say he had a late client dinner for the dealership. I dropped my keys in the ceramic bowl on the counter. The metal clinked sharply against the glaze. I set my bag on the dining table, pulled out my laptop, and sat down. I did not open client files. I opened our personal joint checking account and ran the monthly reconciliation the same way I handled the books for small businesses. I scrolled through the auto pay list, checked the balance, and then opened my Venmo history. Justin transferred his portion of the bills on the first of every month. The top line read $400 the previous month, $450, and the one before that, $500. I kept scrolling, pulling the page down with my thumb until I hit the records from 18 months ago, $800. The numbers formed a descending staircase. I picked up my phone and opened the notes application. I typed Justin Venmo declining check commission schedule, then stared at the blinking cursor while my chest tightened. I pressed backspace until the screen was blank and typed another line. Ask Justin why his share is $400. I held my breath, then deleted that too. I turned my attention back to the bank statement. I scrolled through the weekly grocery charges and the utility drafts, and a charge near the bottom caught my eye. Shell gas station, $41.50, zip code 28205. I opened a new browser tab and typed the numbers in. Plaza Midwood. Justin worked at a dealership on South Boulevard, and we lived in Dilworth, and Plaza Midwood was entirely out of the way on no route to his work or his gym. I closed the browser tab, closed the bank statement, and shut the laptop. The deadbolt clicked and the front door swung open. Justin walked in, dropping his gym bag by the console table. He walked over and kissed the top of my head, and the air around him carried a sharp, citrusy cologne that was not the Nautica I bought him every Christmas. CK1, or something close to it. He asked what I wanted for dinner, and I told him I was not hungry. I said nothing about the $400 or the gas station. 2 hours later, the apartment was cast in the amber glow of the single-floor lamp in the corner. I sat on the pale gray sofa with a hardcover book resting on my lap, open to page 84, the same page I had been staring at for 20 minutes. Justin sat in his oversized recliner, across from me. The television was off. The only sound in the room was the rapid, rhythmic thud of his heel bouncing against the hardwood floor. He was vibrating with nervous energy. He had showered as soon as he got home from his supposed client dinner. The scent of his soap drifted across the coffee table. Old Spice. We bought plain white Dove soap for our bathroom. I registered the smell, cataloged it, and pushed it to the back of my mind. My eyes stayed fixed on the words on page 84. Justin stopped bouncing his leg and cleared his throat. He did not offer a preamble or say we needed to talk. "I have been seeing someone," Justin said, "for 2 years." My hands stayed still on the open pages of the book. I did not look up. "Her name is Skylar," he continued. "She works at the dealership." My index finger rested on the edge of the paper. I did not blink. Justin leaned forward. The leather of the recliner groaned under his shifting weight. His voice dropped into a softer, gentler register. It was the tone he used when he was trying to sell a car to a hesitant buyer. "I did not want to tell you like this, but she has been pushing me to be honest. And I think you deserve honesty." Silence stretched between us. 5 seconds passed. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Justin shifted again. His gentle tone vanished, replaced by a sharp edge of annoyance. He was waiting for a reaction. He wanted tears. He wanted me to yell, "Morgan, did you hear me? I have been cheating for 2 years. You really thought we were still." He let the sentence hang in the air. He offered a half smirk, a strange look of superiority. I closed the book. I placed it carefully on the armrest of the sofa. I raised my head and looked directly at him. "Understood," I said. The word hung in the air. Understood. It was not a display of calm or a mask of cold detachment. It was the word my brain produced as 18 months of mismatched data snapped together into a coherent picture. The shrinking Venmo transfers, the strange cologne, the gas charges in Plaza Midwood, the times he told me his sales commissions were slow, the Thursday client dinners, the Saturday morning gym sessions that lasted 4 hours. The word meant something different from what Justin heard. He was not the subject. I was. I had known. I had seen every warning sign. I had looked right at the numbers and chosen deliberately and repeatedly to override my own judgment. Sitting on the sofa across from the man who had lied to me for 2 years, the sensation in my chest was not the crushing weight of a broken heart. It was a suffocating, burning shame. I was an accountant. I spent 50 hours a week tracking missing funds for strangers. Yet I had ignored the most obvious audit trail of my life. Justin stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He was waiting for me to break down. I stood up. I walked down the short hallway to our bedroom. I stepped inside and shut the door. I turned the lock. A heavy click echoed in the small space. "Morgan, Justin," called out from the living room. "That is it. You are not going to say anything." I did not answer. I heard the leather recliner squeak as he sat back down. A moment later, the television clicked on. The muted sounds of a sports broadcast filtered through the wall. He had already moved on. I sat on the edge of the mattress. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened the banking application. For the first time in 18 months, I looked at the screen and refused to look away. I did not sleep. The digital clock on the nightstand slowly ticked through the hours. 1 in the morning, 3, 5. I sat propped up against the headboard in the dark. The only illumination came from the glaring white screen of my phone. I scrolled through 18 months of joint bank statements. I did not skip a single line. The patterns jumped out at me, glaringly obvious now that I allowed myself to see them. The gas charges in Plaza Midwood happened almost every week. There were cash withdrawals for $100 or $200 scattered throughout the months, always on Fridays. The Venmo transfers from Justin steadily decreased in a clean, linear slope. My chest ached with a dull, heavy pressure. I was staring at the ghost of my mother. I was 14 years old again, standing in the doorway of our kitchen, watching her hold a small white square of paper over the blue flame of the gas stove. She had smelled the perfume on my father. She had found the receipt. She had burned it to keep the peace. Do not go looking for things you do not want to find, she had told me. Was I going to burn my spreadsheet? Was I going to quietly file for divorce, let him take half of everything, and pretend I never saw the numbers? I opened a new text message and addressed it to my mother. Justin is having an affair, I typed. I stared at the words for 10 seconds. I pressed delete. I started a new message to Beth, the senior partner at my firm. Can I talk to you tomorrow? I typed. I stared at it for 5 seconds. I deleted it. I opened my notes application. I created a new file and titled it Things I Saw and Did Not Say. I typed the first line. Venmo shrinking. I typed the second. Plaza Midwood gas. I typed the third. Old Spice. I was not going to burn the receipt. The sun began to rise, casting long gray shadows across the bedroom floor. It was 6 a.m. on Friday. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and stood up. I walked into the bathroom, washed my face, and dressed in my usual work clothes. Black slacks, a crisp white blouse, practical shoes. I unlocked the bedroom door and stepped into the living room. Justin was asleep on the sofa. He had folded out the recliner and thrown a blanket over his legs. He was snoring softly. I walked right past him. I did not pause. I did not look at his face. I picked up my keys from the ceramic bowl, opened the front door, and pulled it quietly shut behind me. The deadbolt engaged with a soft thud. I walked out into the crisp morning air, got into my car, and drove toward the firm. Beth Calloway was 45 years old, fiercely intelligent, and allergic to small talk. She was the senior partner at the firm. I walked past the open door of her corner office, and she took one look at my face. She stopped typing. She had Zura the same expression 12 years ago when her own husband left his phone unlocked on their kitchen counter. Beth stood up, pointed at one of the leather guest chairs in front of her desk, and firmly shut the door behind me. Sit down, Beth said. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not offer me a tissue. She knew neither of those things would help. Tell me what happened. Justin has been cheating, I said. My voice was flat. I sounded like I was reporting a routine quarterly tax discrepancy for a mid-size corporate client. 2 years. He told me last night. Beth let the silence stretch for 5 seconds. She leaned back against her heavy oak desk and crossed her arms. Her eyes searched my face, looking for the breaking point. She did not find it. You are an accountant, Morgan Beth said quietly. When a client sits in that chair and tells you their numbers are clean, what do? I verify. Audit your marriage, she said. Start with the bank statements. You already have access to the joint accounts. Do not tell him you are looking. Beth reached for a square yellow sticky note and a heavy fountain pen. She scribbled a name and a phone number, then slid the paper across the dark wood toward me. Andrea Cho, Family Law. I picked up the small piece of paper. My future sat on a 3x3-inch yellow square. Beth dropped her pen. Her voice lost its sharp corporate edge for a fraction of a second, softening into something raw and deeply personal. I spent $40,000 on a lawyer and a forensic accountant just to learn what you can figure out in a weekend with a laptop and the login credentials you already have. Do not wait 8 months to look at the math like I did. I stayed at my desk long after the rest of the firm emptied out that evening. The overhead fluorescent lights emitted a faint, erratic hum in the empty bullpen. Down the hall in the break room, the commercial coffee machine automatically purged its lines and shut down for the night. I did not notice the noise. I was logged into the joint checking account I shared with Justin. I downloaded 24 months of banking statements. I exported the raw data into a fresh spreadsheet. I began to sort. I applied the exact same rigorous protocol to my marriage that I used for my corporate audits. Every transaction was a single data point. I highlighted rows. I created custom categories. I hunted for patterns in the spending. The truth did not hide. It sat right there in plain text, mocking my deliberate blindness. There were dozens of digital transfers sent directly through the banking application to an account named Skylar V. $900 left our account on the 3rd of each month. The memo line read simply, apt. There were smaller transfers peppered between the rent payments. $50 here, $200 there. The memo lines read dinner or weekend. I pulled up the credit card statements and found charges at upscale downtown restaurants I had never been to in my life. The total amounts matched the cost of dinner and drinks for 2 adults. I reached blindly for my ceramic coffee mug. I took a sip. The dark liquid was ice cold and bitter. I finally looked away from the glaring monitor and checked the time on the bottom corner of the screen. It was 42 minutes past 10. Nearly 4 hours had evaporated in absolute silence. The next afternoon, the bright Saturday sunlight streamed through my kitchen window. It felt too normal, too quiet and domestic for the work spread out across my small wooden dining table. Justin was at the dealership for his weekend shift. I was alone with 3 thick printed stacks of bank statements. The sharp chemical smell of a yellow highlighter filled the air. I dragged the neon tip across another line of text. The ballpoint pen in my right hand scratched heavily against my legal pad. I was verifying the digital math by hand. It was a professional habit I could not break. A smear of blue ink stained the side of my right index finger from gripping the pen too tightly. I opened a browser window and typed in the zip code from the repeated gas station charges. 28205. It mapped to the Plaza Midwood neighborhood. I opened 3 different local property rental websites. I filtered the search results for 1-bedroom apartments priced between $800 and $1,000 a month. I cross-referenced the geographic area with the $900 monthly transfers Justin had been making. One listing sat 3 blocks from the Shell station where the gas charges originated. I typed the address into my spreadsheet. I began the final calculation. I added the restaurant bills, $15,600 over 2 years. I added the apartment rent, $16,200. I added the gifts and the miscellaneous digital transfers, $8,200. I added the weekly gas charges in Plaza Midwood, $4,100. I added the unexplained Friday cash withdrawals, $3,212. The final sum populated in the bottom cell, $47,312. That number was close to the student loan I had paid off last year. It was nearly a 20% down payment on the house we had talked about buying. It was equivalent to 10 months of rent I had paid for our apartment by myself. By Monday morning, I was sitting in a heavy leather chair inside the law office of Andrea Cho. Andrea turned the pages of my printed spreadsheet, tracing the columns with her finger, and looked up. "You did this yourself?" Andrea asked. "No forensic accountant. I'm an accountant," I said. Andrea set the paperwork down flat on her desk. She folded her hands over the documents. "This is the cleanest dissipation tracking I have seen in 10 years of family law. Every transaction is sourced, time-stamped, and categorized." She leaned forward slightly. "North Carolina is a fault state. Adultery bars alimony. And this spreadsheet is your equitable distribution argument. He spent $47,000 of marital funds on the affair. The court deducts that directly from his share." I kept my hands folded in my lap. "What does he get after the deduction?" Andrea said. "Almost nothing." "The real question is whether he knows that yet." Something tight bloomed in my chest, close to power. The plan was clear. File for fault divorce, freeze the assets, serve the papers, present the dissipation claim. But beneath the satisfaction, a quiet warning flickered in my mind. The numbers were too satisfying. The certainty of being right tasted too sweet. My mother's voice echoed from somewhere behind the feeling. There are things you cannot unsee once you look. She was right. I had looked. I had mapped every stolen dollar. The spreadsheet seemed like the end of the war, and cold math seemed like an impenetrable shield, but a man who lies for 2 years does not surrender just because you show him the truth. I gathered my paperwork and stood up. Andrea walked me toward the heavy oak door of her office. "One more thing," Andrea said, her hand resting on the brass doorknob. "We file before you confront him." The automatic temporary restraining order kicks in the exact moment the petition is filed with the clerk. If he tries to move or hide any money after that, it is contempt of court. I nodded once. I gave her the authorization to proceed. On Tuesday morning, Andrea filed the paperwork at the county courthouse. On Tuesday afternoon, a process server walked onto the asphalt lot of Piedmont Motors. He found Justin standing near a row of used sedans and handed him a thick manila envelope. And from the glass-enclosed reception desk across the lot, Schuyler watched the entire exchange, knowing exactly what was inside. My phone vibrated against the smooth wooden surface of the IKEA dining table. It buzzed a second time. Then a third. It was Tuesday evening, just hours after the process server had handed Justin the thick manila envelope in the dealership parking lot. I did not reach for the phone. I sat still and watched the screen light up with his name over and over again. 11 missed calls in the span of 2 hours. I finally opened my voicemail application and listened to them in chronological order. The progression was a masterclass in shifting narratives. In the first message, his voice was thick with manufactured sweetness. "He called me, babe. He told me this was crazy and begged me to just sit down and talk to him." An hour later, the second voicemail shifted into a wounded, breathless register. He sounded like a man who had just been betrayed. He said he could not believe I would throw away 4 years of marriage over a mistake. By midnight, the tone had hardened into cold granite. The third message was clipped and aggressive. He told me his lawyer said I was going to regret doing this to him. The campaign did not stop with my voicemail. On Wednesday morning, my phone started chiming with text messages from 3 different mutual friends. I opened the first one. It asked if I was doing okay. The second line made my jaw clench. The friend gently mentioned that Justin had reached out, claiming I had kicked him out because he simply asked for a little breathing room. The third text from another friend used a very specific word. "Justin says you have been really controlling lately." 3 different people. The exact same word. Controlling. He was rapidly spinning a story where he was the suffocated victim, seeking a moment of peace, and I was the relentless dictator who threw him onto the street. On Thursday evening, I unlocked the front door of our apartment after a long day at the accounting firm. I stepped inside and immediately felt a shift in the air pressure. The space felt hollow. I walked into the living room and stopped. Justin had come back while I was working. He did not leave a note. He simply took his things. The heavy television was gone from the wall mount. The black soundbar was missing from the console table. The tangled mess of gaming controllers had vanished. The oversized leather recliner was no longer occupying the corner of the room. I stared at the rectangular indentation left behind in the rug where his chair used to sit. The tears did not come. He had taken the items that made noise. He had taken the distractions and left me with the quiet. I pulled my phone from my pocket and looked at the text messages again. Controlling? He was flipping the entire reality of our marriage upside down. By Thursday afternoon, I was sitting across from Andrea Cho in her downtown law office. She did not look pleased. Andrea slid a thick stack of stapled paper across her desk. It was the official legal response from Justin and his attorney. She tapped her manicured fingernail against the second page. His lawyer was arguing that I was financially suffocating him. The document claimed that I managed all the household accounts exclusively. It stated that Justin had limited access to his own marital finances and that I made every financial decision without consulting him. To back up this claim, Justin had filed a sworn financial disclosure with the court. Andrea pointed to a specific line item on the final page. Under the section for total annual income, Justin had sworn under penalty of perjury that he made approximately $50,000 a year. I looked at the number. 50,000. That was the lie he had told me since the day we got married. Andrea folded her hands on the desk. She explained that if the judge bought his narrative, my dissipation claim would weaken. His lawyer would argue that he was not hiding money for an affair, but simply trying to keep a few dollars for himself because his wife controlled every penny. Data beats narrative, Andrea assured me, but we needed the absolute proof. We had filed a subpoena for his actual commission records from Piedmont Motors 2 weeks ago. The dealership was legally required to produce them by early next week. If his real income matched the $50,000 on his sworn disclosure, my case was in trouble. But if he made more, he had just lied, under oath, to a judge. I walked out of her office knowing the entire weekend would be a waiting game. Saturday night arrived heavy and suffocating. I sat on the cold, hardwood floor of my apartment, my back pressed against the pale gray sofa. I was in the exact same physical position I had been in on the first night, but the laptop resting on my knees was closed. There was no glowing spreadsheet. There were no columns of concrete data to anchor me. There was only the creeping, pervasive rot of self-doubt. The apartment was silent. The mechanical hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen felt amplified in the empty space. My phone lay face down on the floor beside my hip. I pulled my knees tightly to my chest and wrapped my arms around my legs, making myself as small as possible. The doubt rushed in like freezing water. I started to wonder if Justin was actually right. Was I the controlling one? I was the person who sat down at the dining table every month and balanced the ledgers. I was the one who set up the automatic payments for the electricity, the water, and the car insurance. I never asked him to log into the portal. I never asked him to call the utility companies. I just handled it. Did I create this dynamic? Did I subconsciously build a cage of financial competence that made him feel useless? Maybe he felt suffocated. Maybe I pushed him right into the arms of a receptionist who did not care about credit scores or grocery budgets. My breathing grew shallow. A sharp ache settled behind my ribs. The ghost of my mother appeared again, standing in the kitchen of our house in Huntersville, wiping the counters every time my father stumbled through the back door, smelling like cheap beer and someone else's perfume. She never screamed. She never threw plates. She just cleaned up his messes, paid the late notices he hid in his truck, and made sure my school clothes were ironed. She handled everything so he did not have to. And he still betrayed her. Was this the genetic curse of the women in my family? We take care of everything the men leave us, and then we sit on the floor and blame ourselves? I picked up my phone. I opened my contacts and dialed my mother's number. It rang 3 times. She answered with a soft questioning, "Hello." "Justin has been having an affair," I said into the receiver. "For 2 years." The line went dead. For a long time, the only sound was the faint static of the cellular connection. My mother did not gasp. She did not ask if I was sure. "Did you ask him why?" she finally asked. Her voice sounded incredibly frail. My throat tightened. I gripped the phone harder. "Did you ever ask Dad why?" Another long stretch of heavy silence passed between us. I could hear her taking a slow, shaky breath. "I knew why," my mother said quietly. I just did not want to hear the answer. The call ended shortly after that. I set the phone back down on the hardwood floor and repeated her words to the empty room. She knew why. She just did not want to hear the answer. I let my head fall back against the fabric of the sofa. A strange physical sensation started in the tips of my fingers and slowly washed over my chest. The tight, crushing knot of anxiety that had been choking me for 2 days suddenly unraveled. It vanished, the way a persistent ringing in your ears finally stops and leaves you with sudden, crystal-clear clarity. I was not controlling. I was compensating. There was a massive, fundamental difference. A controlling partner changes the passwords. A controlling partner hoards the debit cards and demands receipts for every cup of coffee. I never did any of that. Justin had the banking application installed directly on his own phone. He had a joint debit card sitting right there in his leather wallet. He had full access to the Venmo account. I gave him the keys to the house, and he actively chose not to walk through the door. Every single time I had noticed the shrinking transfers and almost asked him about the money he had kissed, my forehead told me sales were slow and made me feel like I was nagging him. I did not control the finances because I loved the power. I controlled the finances because if I did not pay the rent, we would be evicted. I paid the electricity because I did not want to live in the dark. I was not a dictator. I was a survivor trapped inside a system that was specifically designed to make me question my own sanity. Revenge had lost its taste. Punishing him was not the point anymore. The point was trusting myself. The point was looking at the sky, seeing that it was blue, and never again letting a man convince me it was green. I reached for my laptop and lifted the lid. The screen flared to life, casting a blue glow over my hands and the dark floorboards. I opened the spreadsheet. I scrolled past the restaurant charges and the Plaza Midwood gas station receipts. I looked at the bottom line. $47,312. That number was not just a debt he owed the court. That number was the price of my intuition. Every transaction was a moment in time where I had been right, and I had chosen to bury my own judgment to keep the peace. I owed it to myself to finally believe the math. I opened my email application. I started a new message to Andrea Cho. My fingers moved quickly across the keys, the plastic clacking sharply in the quiet apartment. When exactly do we get the commission records from the dealership? I typed. I hit send, closed the laptop, and waited for the morning. Monday morning brought the final piece of the puzzle. I sat in the familiar leather guest chair in Andrea Cho's office, watching as she slid a thick manila envelope across her desk. It was the fulfilled subpoena from Piedmont Motors. The dealership had handed over 24 months of Justin's complete payroll and commission records. I opened the flap, pulled out the printed ledgers, and began to scan the columns. My eyes tracked down the pages, matching the dates to the memories in my head. March, $4,200 in commission. That was the month he kissed my forehead and told me sales were incredibly slow when I asked why his Venmo transfer was short. July, $5,100. November, $3,800. There was not a single month where his commission dropped below $3,000. He was averaging $4,400 a month in bonuses, sitting right on top of his $42,000 base salary. His total compensation was roughly $95,000 a year. I looked up at Andrea. She was already watching me, her expression level. Justin had filed a sworn financial disclosure with the county court just a few days ago, legally claiming an annual income of approximately $50,000. He had lied under oath. Andrea leaned back in her chair and steepled her fingers. She explained that lying about income in a sworn disclosure was a sanctionable offense. It meant the judge could and likely would draw an adverse inference against him on everything else he had claimed. His entire narrative about being the financially oppressed husband was built on a foundation of perjury. We had a new strategy. We were going to present both spreadsheets at the mediation session on Friday. We were going to let his own numbers destroy his story. Friday morning arrived with a clear, pale sky. At 10 o'clock, I walked into a heavy glass conference room in a mediator's office in downtown Charlotte. A long, rectangular wooden table dominated the space. The polished surface was so clear, I could see the blurred reflection of my own hands resting on the edge. In the center of the table sat a glass water pitcher. The ice had already melted, leaving a pool of condensation on the cork coaster beneath it, and the water lukewarm. I had a plain manila folder sitting neatly in front of me. It contained 2 years of highlighted, categorized truth. Justin walked in a moment later with his attorney. My breath caught for a fraction of a second, not out of sadness, but out of sheer observation. Justin was wearing a sharp charcoal suit and a crisp, light blue tie. His hair was styled with visible effort, and the scent of expensive cologne drifted across the room. He was putting more effort into his appearance for a mediator he had never met than he had ever put in for me in our own living room. The mediator, a woman in her early 50s with a calm, neutral demeanor, sat at the head of the table and opened the session. Justin's lawyer leaned forward immediately. He was an aggressive, broad-shouldered man who spoke with loud authority. He announced that his client was willing to negotiate a fair division of assets, but heavily stressed that I had managed all the household finances exclusively. He painted a picture of a marriage where Justin was effectively excluded from every financial decision, a passive participant at the mercy of his controlling wife. Andrea let him finish his entire speech. She did not interrupt. She did not sigh. When the room fell quiet, she simply reached out and opened my plain manila folder. "Let me present Exhibit A," Andrea said. She slid copies of my dissipation spreadsheet across the polished wood. She walked the room through the transactions, line by line. She did not raise her voice. She did not add dramatic flair. She simply read the data. January, a digital transfer to Skylar Voss for $150 labeled dinner. February, $200 labeled weekend. March, a transfer for $900 labeled apartment. Then Andrea turned to the second page. It was a parallel comparison chart. On the left side, it tracked Justin's spending on his girlfriend, rising steadily from $300 a month to over $1,400 a month once the apartment lease began. On the right side, the chart tracked Justin's monthly contributions to our household, dropping from $800 down to $400 over the same 18-month period. The two lines intersected. Andrea looked directly at the mediator. As his spending on his mistress increased, his contributions to the household decreased proportionally. Mrs. Pratt made up the difference every month without being told why. I watched Justin's face. The confident, easy charm he had walked in with began to evaporate. His jaw tightened. The muscles in his neck flexed. He shot a panicked look at his lawyer. "Exhibit B," Andrea said smoothly. She pulled out the subpoenaed commission records from Piedmont Motors and placed them directly beside the dissipation spreadsheet. Mr. Pratt disclosed an annual income of approximately $50,000 to this court. Andrea continued. The dealership records show an average monthly commission of $4,400 on top of his base salary. His total compensation is approximately $95,000 a year, and it has been for 2 years. Andrea placed her hands flat on the table. Mr. Pratt underreported his income by $45,000 a year under oath. He spent $47,312 of marital funds on an extramarital affair, while his wife paid every household bill. When she filed for divorce, he claimed she was the controlling party. The numbers matched. The spreadsheet sat side by side, an undeniable monument to his deception. Justin's lawyer cleared his throat, his aggressive posture gone. He immediately asked the mediator for a recess. I spent the 30-minute break standing in the quiet, carpeted hallway, holding a plastic bottle of water and looking out the window at the parking lot. Andrea stood next to me. She told me his lawyer was likely reading him the riot act inside the private consultation room. The commission records changed everything. He had lost all his leverage. When we returned to the conference room at 11:30, Justin looked physically collapsed. The sharp charcoal suit suddenly looked slightly too big for his frame. He had loosened his crisp blue tie and unbuttoned his collar. He stared at the wood grain of the table. His lawyer spoke quietly. My client is prepared to accept a modified equitable distribution. He acknowledges the affair-related expenditures. Andrea did not miss a beat. Our proposal is the full $47,312 deducted from the respondent's share of the marital estate. We require post-separation support of $1,200 a month for 12 months, representing rehabilitative support for a short marriage. The respondent retains his personal vehicle and clothing. The petitioner retains all household furnishings purchased during the marriage. The alienation of affection suit against Miss Voss will be filed separately. Justin snapped. His head jerked up and he looked directly at me for the very first time since the night he confessed in our living room. "Morgan, come on," Justin said, his voice cracking with a mix of anger and disbelief. 47,000. You are going to destroy me over $47,000. The room went dead silent. His lawyer reached out and touched his arm, a silent warning to stop talking, but I was already looking right back into Justin's eyes. My spine was straight and my hands were still, and the ground beneath me was solid. You sent Skylar $900 a month for an apartment while I set our electric bill on autopay because you told me sales were slow, I said. My voice was steady, dropping into a low, measured cadence. Every number in that folder is something I saw and did not say anything about. For 18 months, so no, I am not destroying you over $47,000. I am showing you what it cost me to not trust myself. Justin opened his mouth to reply, but nothing came out. He closed it again. He looked away. I kept looking at him across the mediator's table, and something settled into place behind my sternum, heavy and permanent. I did not need him to say anything else. I did not need him to apologize or to validate my pain or to admit that I was a good wife. The numbers had already spoken, and more importantly, I had let myself believe them. The spreadsheet was never just a weapon to take his money. It was a mirror. It showed me that for a year and a half my instincts had been flawless, and I had simply been too terrified to honor them. The mediator broke the silence, noting that we had a solid framework for an agreement, and suggesting we move to draft the final detail. I leaned back in my heavy leather chair and looked at the spreadsheet resting in the center of the table. Every single digit was a moment I had doubted myself. I would never do it again. By 11 o'clock that night, I was back inside my apartment. It was the same pale gray sofa. It was the same small wooden dining table. The television and the recliner were still gone. The space was just as quiet as it had been on the first night of this nightmare, but the quality of the silence had changed. It did not feel hollow anymore. It felt like ownership. It felt like peace. I sat at the table and opened my laptop. I did not look at Justin's numbers. I opened a brand new blank spreadsheet. I titled it Personal Budget. In the first column, I typed my rent, $1,650. I would find a cheaper place when the lease ran out, but I could cover it for now. I typed in the car insurance, $170 just for my own vehicle, electric $67, internet $89, streaming services $15 because I canceled all the packages I never actually watched, groceries $280. I looked at the total at the bottom of the screen. It was tight. It was going to require discipline, but it was entirely manageable on my single income. For the first time in 4 years, every number on the screen belonged exclusively to me. There were no hidden transfers. There were no adjustments to make up for slow sales. There were no mysteries to override, and there were no receipts to burn on a gas stove. I stood up and walked into the kitchen. I opened the refrigerator and pulled out a glass container of leftover pasta I had cooked the night before. I had made exactly one portion. I put it on a plate, poured myself a glass of cold water, and walked back to the sofa. My phone vibrated on the cushion next to me. The screen lit up with Justin's name. I had stopped counting his missed calls sometime during the second week. I picked up the phone, stared at his name for a second, and pressed the red button to decline the call. I did not block his number because Andrea needed the communication logs for the official record, but I was never going to answer his voice again. I opened my email. There was a new message from Andrea waiting at the top of my inbox. The settlement terms were finalized, and both parties had signed the drafted agreement. The alienation of affection filing against his receptionist had been successfully processed by the clerk. The absolute divorce could be legally filed after the mandatory 12-month separation period concluded in March of next year. Everything was on track. I closed the email application. I locked the laptop screen. I looked around the empty, quiet living room. It was finally mine. I unlocked my phone one last time and opened the Notes application. I tapped on the file, titled Things I Saw and Did Not Say. I scrolled past the long, painful list of every warning sign I had ignored. I scrolled past the cologne, the gas stations, the late nights, and the missing cash. When I reached the very bottom of the document, I tapped the screen to bring up the keyboard. I typed a single new line. I see everything now. And I believe it.